ان کی تاریخ کیا تھی, ان کے لیے جو ویلیو سیٹ ہے, جو انسانی اقدار پہ ہیومن ویلیوز جو ہیں وہ کیا ہونی چاہیے, اور اسلامی اقدار جو ہمارے مذہب کے اقدار ہیں وہ ان سے کیسے ریلیٹ کرتی ہیں. اور پھر جس معاشرے سے ہم لوگ آئے ہیں وہ بھی ایک مخلوط معاشرہ ہوا کرتا تھا تقسیم سے پہلے. اس میں بھی جو مسائل جس وقت اقبال اس معاشرے کا ذکر کر رہے ہیں, اس میں ایک فکر دے رہے ہیں لوگوں کو, تو اس کے اندر کیا وہ ایسی چیزیں تھیں کہ جس کا وہ پرچار کر رہے تھے جو شاید ہمیں اب آج اگر ہم پاکستان میں دیکھیں تو شاید ہمیں نہ ملے ہو. لیکن جب اقبال لکھ رہے تھے, جو معاشرہ اقبال کے سامنے تھا, ان کے سامنے ایک بہت بڑا کینوس تھا, اور بہت ان کی جو نظر ہے, اب کہا جائے تو ایک ویژنری تھے. اور مقبول صاحب جو ہیں وہ اگلے مہینے اس کے اوپر ایک ٹاک بھی دیں گے جس میں ان کی جو پیش گوئیاں جو ہیں اقبال کی, اس کے اوپر بات کی جائے گی. تو میں بس یہ کہنا چاہ رہا ہوں کہ ہمارے لیے یہاں پر جس چیز پر ہمیں کام کرنا ہے, پہلے تو یہ, کیونکہ کسی کو میں نہیں سمجھتا کہ اس چیز سے کوئی جو نئی نسل ہے جنہوں نے اقبال کو سنا بھی نہیں ہے, کہ فار دیم دا فرسٹ کوشچن از کہ وہ اقبال کو پڑھے کیوں, لائک ان کا رابطہ کیوں ہے کون, ان کے لیے ضروری کیوں ہے یہ. تو جب آپ دیکھیں گے کہ جو وقت تھا بر صغیر کی تحریک آزادی کا, اس کے اندر کیا تھا کہ ایک اس وقت کے اندر جو ہے وہ مسلمانوں کے لیے ایک تشخص, ان کے ہیومن ویلیوز کے لیے, ان کی انسانی اقدار کے تحفظ کے لیے جو ہے جو کام اقبال نے کیا ہے, میں سمجھتا ہوں کہ آج چھوٹے پیمانے پر ہمیں یہاں پر بھی اسی طرح کے کچھ کام کرنے کی ضرورت ہے, تاکہ ہم اپنی جو ویلیو سیٹ ہیں اور ہمارے دلوں میں, ہمارے ذہنوں میں, ہماری عقل میں جو تضاد ہے, جو کانفلکٹس ہیں وہ ختم ہوں, اور ہم بیسکلی ایک اس معاشرے میں انٹیگریٹ ہو کر اپنی آئیڈینٹی قائم رکھ کر انٹیگریٹ ہوں, اور کچھ اس سے بھی سیکھیں اور کچھ اس کو سکھائیں بھی. تو میرے نزدیک یہ بڑی عمدہ ایک کاوش ہے. میں اسد صاحب کو, آپ کو بھی, اور بیٹی بھی, اور رابعہ جو ہیں, ان سب کو بہت مبارک دیتا ہوں. آج بہت سارے لوگ آئے ہیں, اور آئی ہوپ کہ ہم یہاں سے جو ہے کچھ ایک جذبہ, ایک جو شوق ہے اقبال کو سمجھنے کے لیے, وہ ہمیں پیدا ہوگا. اور اس زمین میں اب یہ چیز تو اب چل پڑی ہے, تو ہر مہینے انشاءاللہ یہاں پہ کچھ نہ کچھ ہوتا رہے گا. آپ کے ذہنوں میں بھی کوئی سوال ہو, کوئی کسی قسم کی کوئی تجویز ہو, تو ضرور ہمارے سامنے لے کر آئیں. اور
کوئی پریزنٹ کرنا چاہے کرے اور ریسرچ کرے اور پریزنٹیشن دے.
جی بالکل. بس میں آخر میں یہی کہنا چاہوں گا کہ جی وہ اقبال کے ایک شعر پہ کہ نہیں ہے اقبال نا امید اپنی کشت ویراں سے, ذرا نم ہو تو یہ مٹی بہت زرخیز ہے ساتھ. تو اس کے ساتھ لگے رہیے, اور دس از یور اکیڈمی. آپ اس کے ساتھ اپنے تجاویز لے کر آئیں, اور اس کو جس سمت پہ لے کے جانا چاہتے ہیں اس سمت میں لے کے جائیں. اس کو بہت شکریہ.
میری سسٹر کہہ رہی تھی کچھ اقبال کی, آپ
نے کچھ اقبال پہ کام, کوئی نظم لکھی ہے, کچھ سنائیں گے آپ؟
یہ ہم آخر میں ابھی کریں گے یہ پروگرام جو ہے, جی ہاں, دین وی ول ڈو آل دوز تھنگز انشاءاللہ. آخر کا آدھا گھنٹہ انشاءاللہ اسی طرح کی ایکٹیویٹیز کے لیے ہے کہ آپ سننا چاہیں, کچھ کہنا چاہیں, کوئی یا اینی تجویز انشاءاللہ آپ خود بھی کچھ کہنا چاہیں ول بھی.
سوری, میں کہہ رہی تھی آپ سب کو کہہ دیتے نا پریپریشن کر کے آئے, تھوڑا سے رٹے لگا کے آئے, نظم.
جی جی جی, آئندہ نشست میں لوگ آ جائیں گے تیار ہو کے
ٹاپک کے ساتھ.
السلام علیکم ایوری باڈی. تو میری اردو اس طرح کی ہے کہ صرف میرے ماں باپ سمجھ سکتے ہیں, تو میں انگلش میں ہی کروں گی. تو ہاں, تو اسینشلی ہم لوگ نے شروع کیا تھا یہ basically to get like the youth linked with learning about Iqbal and some of these ideas. تو جیسے آپ لوگ نے پہلے بولا تھا کہ we're going to talk a little bit about why we even need to know him. تو ابھی میں تھوڑا سا شروع کروں گی. I'm going to do a bit of a brief history for those who don't know, because we have some youth present and like myself that are still learning about him and learning some of his history, and then I'll go into some of the ideas and some of the links he basically had for youth and some of the ideas that he had for them and what he thinks kind of our role is in society, and especially as young Muslims. So, of course, his name was Muhammad Iqbal, widely known as Allama Iqbal. And one of the reasons we're having this specific program, and just as the intro, is to really connect this younger generations of Muslims, and particularly South Asian Muslims, although not limited to, with positive role models. Because there's a lot of role models out there, whether they're celebrities or whether they're fathers of ideological thought, so whether there's people like Nietzsche or lots of other kind of philosophers, but they don't always have the correct message. And you can get really lost in a lot of different ideologies, and particularly a lot of Western ideologies. And so Allama Iqbal is one that really tied Western and Eastern thought together and used Quran and Sunnah as the rope to really carry these ideas together. So my journey in learning about him is relatively new. So I'll start at the beginning and give a bit of an overview. I know a lot of people, of course, here already know who he is and know his history much better than I do, but just bear with me. So first of all, so just talking about Allama Iqbal as his nickname, or maybe a name given more kind of out of love and reverence for him. So a lot of us born outside of South Asia and the western part of the world, like myself, are removed from certain parts of our history and of notable figures. I personally was born in the States, and then we moved to Canada. Although in our home we had a strong emphasis on speaking Urdu, particularly because I grew up with my dadi, my paternal grandmother. However, I didn't learn how to write it, and reading it is very difficult for me. And so in that, you lose some of the deep richness of the Urdu language, particularly in academic settings and Urdu in literature, because it's a bit of a high-level Urdu, and that can often get lost. And so to understand writing of somebody like Allama Iqbal, it's sometimes hard to understand the deep level of what he was speaking about because of the complexity of the language. So in schooling here, we focus so much on Western intellectuals, and we don't tend to focus on the wealth of knowledge in the East and of a lot of our homelands. So Allama itself, it's an honorary title carried by scholars of Islamic fiqh, jurisprudence, and philosophy. So it's used as an honorific in the language, mostly in South Asia and the Middle East and Iran. So this is why they call him Allama Iqbal, because his philosophies and his writings were actually very deeply entrenched within the Quran and Sunnah. So to give a bit of a background on kind of the world that he grew up in and what he was kind of born into and what formed his thought process, he was born in 1877 and he passed away in 1938. So he passed away right before World War II in the actual separation of Pakistan and India. Although he was already lobbying for a separate Muslim state, he didn't live to see the fruition of his ideas, but in many ways he laid the social and cultural foundation for it. He wasn't a politician, and interestingly enough, he didn't actually consider himself a poet either. So his title is often like Sha'ir-e-Mashriq, poet of the East, and in both like Western and Eastern like writings, they refer to him as that. So even if you learn about him here, they'll often refer to him as poet of the East. But he himself, in his personal correspondences, he wrote, I've never considered myself a poet, therefore I'm not a rival of anyone, and I don't consider anybody else my rival. I have no interest in poetic artistry. But yes, I have a special goal in mind for whose expression I use the medium of poetry, considering the condition and the customs of this country. So this here is actually very, very interesting. He's not writing to compete with his contemporaries, and that's not his goal or interest. He used poetry as a tool to communicate ideas in a way that was palatable and best received by the environment he was in at the time. So the way he communicated was very contextual, and in that sense, his dawah was really tailored to who he was speaking to. So what were the ideas that he was communicating? Well, they were vast and many, but one of the very major themes of a lot of what he said, early in life and later in life, was of uninhibited striving of Muslims using the Quran and Sunnah to establish themselves and really revive the Ummah and Islamic spirit and bring glory back to the legacy of the Muslims. So he had a lot of messages for youth in particular, and he had a really strong emphasis on capacity building. So basically, he wanted Muslims to remove the mental block that we had put on ourselves that really suppressed our potential and our ambition. He really valued boldness and seizing the day and seizing opportunity and really putting yourself out to new heights. So what made him really different from writers and leaders of social shift at that time was he really boldly and pragmatically integrated Western and Eastern thought, because he realized that we were moving into a new age with increased globalization and national migration. Not only that, he had a lot of experience with Western ideologies, and he actually wasn't really that impressed with them. He actually didn't agree with extreme individualism, and he wasn't impressed with it, and he talks about that. So what his educational background was, so in India, he received his Faculty of Arts diploma, his bachelor's in English, philosophy, and Arabic, and then he got his master's in philosophy. And he studied in Sialkot and Lahore. So one of his professors was really impressed by him, and they recommended him to pursue higher studies abroad. So he traveled to England and Germany, he got his bachelor's, his law degree, he got called to the bar as well, and he completed his PhD. So by the end of his life, he was proficient in English, Arabic, Persian, Urdu, Punjabi, and German, and he wrote in all of them. So his time abroad is actually very, very interesting because he spent a lot of time reading a lot of Western writers, and often as we move into the later years of high school and university, we come across these writers as well. So Nietzsche, Kant, Hegel, etc. And he also spent time, he spent a lot of time learning from Rumi as well, but since he's an Eastern scholar, we'll kind of discuss that a little bit later. He was actually knighted in England as well, and he was really recognized for his work and his writings there. He was also still very much connected to his deen. So there's often this idea for young Muslims when you're in university and pursuing your secular education and your career that you should focus on that and not on the deen because it's a distraction. But if we look at somebody like Iqbal, he actually moved to an entirely different continent to study. And in his time in England, he was studying philosophy and law, so very heavy course load. But he actually joined the London branch of the All India Muslim League. So he did this on his extra time because he was really passionate about that. And he was really passionate about a separate state for Muslims to reach their full potential and practice fully in light of the Quran and Sunnah. So he really didn't agree with this idea of separation of church and state. He didn't agree with secularism and putting kind of religion to one side. He really believed in integration. So when he returned to India, one of the first things he wanted to do was actually establish a learning center because he really believed that ongoing education in secular matters and religious matters was essential for all Muslims and to do it side by side. He also, certain things happened. It wasn't able to come to what he wanted it to be, but it was one of his aims. He also really, really pushed for self-confidence in every Muslim, and particularly in the youth. So this is kind of one of his poems. I'll read it in English. It's just like a couplet taken from his poems. So he says, "Does your heart tremble from the fear of the impending storm? So are you scared of what's coming? Know that you are the sailor, you are the ocean, you are the boat, and the seashore." So this idea was to not be afraid of fate or what's coming, but to embrace it and move forward with it and have confidence that you can conduct yourself in any situation and take charge in any situation. He was also very critical of colonialism and Western imperialism and individualism. He grew up in this time and he saw the problems for what they were. He studied in the West, he was very successful, he was knighted, he could have stayed there, right? He could have drank the Kool-Aid, he could have lived abroad and just criticized the Eastern world and Muslims of India and stay back in England or in Germany. But he chose to go back. He really saw these things for what they were, and he wasn't impressed by the glitz and glamour and pursuit of individual desires. And he cautioned young Muslims to be aware of it and not be lost in it. So he was very well connected to his homeland and the deen, and he didn't think that, okay, I should just move to England and kind of criticize people back home and, that's it. No, he really believed in Muslims, in the spirit of Muslims, in the spirit of the youth particularly, and in the vision of Pakistan. So keep in mind that Iqbal lived under colonial rule. And so, in that time, particularly in that time frame, it was very difficult for Muslims. They had just kind of undergone another war, and Muslims were kind of copying it from all sides. The British were coming down on Muslims, the Hindu majority at that time, they had just ended really Mughal rule. So the rule of Muslims in India had declined as well, and now they're under Hindu rules. So you had Muslims who had really low self-esteem. They weren't feeling very good about themselves, their spirits were broken, and they weren't necessarily advancing themselves in knowledge of the deen or in secular matters. So in this time is when he really felt this passion to kind of ignite this back for the Muslims. So he said that we can't comply with modern Western capitalism with this undisciplined individual any longer. So you'll find that a lot of Muslims will take this and they'll say, okay, we don't agree with capitalism, but we're Marxists. So we believe in communism, we believe in Karl Marx, and we're Leninists. And we don't really see Islam as a viable political entity or economic structure. We see Islam as something purely kind of social and spiritual, but we don't see it as having a space in the political and economic sphere. So Iqbal didn't agree with that. He said he was really critical of it. He was critical of Marx himself. He wasn't impressed by Marxism. He said that Marx said that faith was the heart of the heartless world, and he reasoned that if we submit to God, we lose our creative power, and that we'll be dominated by anybody. But Iqbal held a totally different view. He said, for him, he said the essence of religion is your faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and faith, which has a cognitive content, is the source of creative energy. So he's saying be an intellectual Muslim, be a critical Muslim, and through that, through your adherence to Islam, you'll find your creativity. So long as you connect yourself to the deen and submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the potential you have is limitless. Because the source of all your creative energies and passions and intelligence is held by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who has no limits. So this is kind of some of the message he was trying to impress upon the youth, to really light this fire in them and to not feel limited by any kind of political structures or social structures, and to really push beyond that. So he also held a big reference for the Quran. So he saw it as not just a book of religion, like just a book of stories or spirituality, but as a source of fundamental principles upon which like the infrastructure of an organization can be built as like a whole system of life. So according to Iqbal, this system of life, when implemented as a living force, is Islam in itself. So because it's based on absolute values given in the Quran, this system provides perfect harmony, balance, and stability in society from within, and security and a shield from outside of it. He said, through Islam, you also have personal autonomy and opportunities for the development of character and personality for everybody within the guidelines of the Quran. So in his opinion, Islam isn't a religion which individuals strive for just a private relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's to be like a strong force and a nation in yourself, in whatever environment you are, and to affect change. So he said this. I asked my mom to correct my pronunciation in case I was wrong. So he said, "Gharib o sada o rangeen hai dastan e haram. Intaha uski Hussain, ibtaha hai Ismail." So the noble path in the history of Islam is full of simple lessons of devotion, honesty, and commitment, whose culmination is Hussein and beginning is Ismail. So essentially in saying this, he's saying, okay, think of Ismail alayhi salam. From a very young age, he